"I don't have time to hesitate," David Reynolds muttered under his breath as the headlights of oncoming cars streaked across the wet asphalt, illuminating the rain-soaked highway in a blur of white and yellow. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white, every muscle alert, heart pounding with that sharp rhythm only adrenaline can bring. Ahead, a figure stumbled, a young woman caught in the chaos of the storm and traffic, her coat flapping, hair plastered to her face, and David's eyes locked on hers with an instinctive clarity. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once as he swung the wheel and pressed the brakes, feeling the tires skid against the slick road, rain spraying in fine mist around the vehicle. The roar of engines and wind became background noise, fading into a tunnel where only action and reaction existed. Without a thought for himself, he leapt from the car, boots hitting the wet pavement with a splash, coat soaked instantly, and sprinted toward her, the world around shrinking to the space between them. He reached out, steadying her, voice calm but urgent, "You're going to be fine. I've got you." Emily Mitchell, shivering and wide-eyed, blinked up at him, the storm reflecting in her gaze, confusion and relief warring across her face. David's mind was a whirlwind of silent calculation, how to keep her safe, how to move swiftly, how to act without drawing attention, all while knowing each second mattered. The rain pelted down harder, the lights of passing cars casting fleeting shadows, but he kept his posture firm, exuding a quiet confidence that grounded them both. He guided her to the shoulder, scanning the traffic for any sign of danger, every instinct sharpened, every sense tuned to the moment. The roar of the storm seemed almost protective now, masking their movements, a blanket of nature's chaos providing cover for human courage. He could see her trembling, not from cold alone but from shock, and he spoke softly, reassuringly, every word measured, infused with a dignity that radiated calm despite the storm. "Just a few more steps. We're almost safe." Together, they moved, each careful, deliberate, moving as if the rain and the darkness were an accomplice to their silent strategy. In that fleeting sequence of heartbeats, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only David's steady presence, his quiet determination, and the implicit trust forming in Emily's eyes. For a moment, the chaos faded, replaced by a strange stillness, a fragile serenity punctuated by the rain's rhythm. The adrenaline ebbed slightly, leaving a calm resolve in its wake, a sense of quiet dignity in having acted without expectation, without recognition, only the pure, immediate need to do what was right. And as they reached a place where the pavement widened, where headlights could no longer catch them so harshly, David's gaze met hers again, and in the brief, unspoken exchange, a story was written in silence, a story of courage, composure, and the understated power of doing what needed to be done without fanfare. David led Sarah a few steps away from the highway, the rain still falling steadily, each drop catching the dim streetlights and scattering tiny reflections across the pavement. His coat was soaked through, the chill of the evening pressing against his skin, but his focus remained unwavering, his eyes scanning the empty lanes to ensure no lingering danger approached. Sarah shivered slightly, gripping the straps of her bag, and David instinctively offered her his jacket, draping it carefully over her shoulders with a quiet gentleness. "It is going to be all right now," he said, his voice calm, carrying a tone of authority without command, a presence that radiated safety and composure. She nodded, her lips pressed together, and for a moment, they simply stood there, breathing in sync, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft patter of rain on asphalt. David thought about the responsibility that had been thrust upon him in an instant, about how life sometimes demanded courage without applause, and how small decisions could echo in ways unseen. He asked her softly, "Can you walk to the service station over there?" And when she nodded again, he began to guide her, slow and deliberate, each step measured, each gesture reassuring. As they moved, he kept glancing at the reflections on the wet pavement, alert to every flicker of movement in the periphery, every sound amplified by the wet night air. His mind shifted briefly to his own child, imagining what he would do in the same situation, the lessons of patience, of careful observation, of silent action, weighing heavily. Sarah looked up at him with tentative trust, and David offered a small, encouraging smile, sensing the bond of reliance that had formed in the brief Intense moments of shared experience. The service station came into view, lights warm and inviting against the gray night, and David relaxed just slightly, feeling a sense of quiet relief that the immediate danger had passed. Yet he remained vigilant, watching the approach of cars and the shadows they cast, every movement still calculated, still deliberate, as if instinct had taken permanent residence in his muscles. They reached the doorway, and he paused, letting her enter first, hands still lightly on her arms to steady her, the unspoken understanding clear between them. Safety was a shared responsibility, trust earned in moments of action. The warmth of the station washed over them, a stark contrast to the chill outside, and David allowed himself a deep breath, noticing the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee and asphalt mingling. "You are safe now," he said again, quieter this time, almost to himself, a reflection of the silent pride he felt in having done what was necessary without expectation of recognition. Sarah glanced back, eyes meeting his, and in that brief exchange, words were unnecessary. The acknowledgement passed between them carried weight, a testament to human decency acting quietly, firmly, with dignity. The storm outside continued its relentless song, yet within that small illuminated space, there was a moment of calm, a recognition that courage need not be loud, that integrity and care could shine in silence, and that sometimes, the smallest actions cast the longest shadows of impact. David stepped back from the doorway, letting Sarah find her footing inside the service station, the warmth immediately contrasting the damp chill clinging to their clothes. He took a slow, measured breath, the hum of fluorescent lights and faint aroma of brewed coffee filling the space, grounding him after the intensity of the highway. His mind, however, refused to rest, replaying each instant, each decision, analyzing what went right, what could have been done better, not out of regret but from the meticulous care of someone who understood that small choices carried weight. Sarah wandered to a corner near the windows, wrapping the borrowed jacket tighter around herself, and David observed her silently, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the cautious relief beginning to show. He pulled his own coat closer, listening to the distant sound of tires on wet roads, feeling the lingering rhythm of his heartbeat, a slow echo of tension easing into vigilance. He imagined the narrative that might unfold if someone had witnessed their actions, the assumptions, the judgments, the rapid conclusions drawn in mere seconds, and he reflected on how often courage goes unseen, how integrity is quietly tested in those unobserved moments. Sarah turned toward him, eyes meeting his with a mixture of trust and tentative curiosity, and David offered a nod, a silent affirmation that everything would be all right, that calm could exist even in a world that often demanded chaos. The service station attendant moved in the background, footsteps soft against the linoleum, a subtle reminder of normalcy, of routine, and David felt a fleeting connection to the everyday life that continued despite storms, despite uncertainty. He allowed himself a moment to relax his shoulders, to release some of the taut energy coiled inside, knowing that attention to detail, patience, and quiet determination had guided them both to this point. A car passed outside, headlights briefly illuminating the interior, casting shadows that flickered across faces, highlighting the shared vulnerability and mutual reliance. David spoke again, softly, almost to himself, words of reassurance that carried no expectation. "It is going to be fine," he said, the cadence steady, measured, echoing his internal belief in the necessity of calm action. Sarah exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of her earlier fear, and she nodded, a faint smile breaking the tension as she adjusted her jacket. David scanned the station, noting the aisles, the exit points, the small nuances of light and space, aware that preparation and observation were as vital now as action had been moments ago. In this quiet pause, amidst the ordinary hum and the subdued lighting, a sense of shared understanding blossomed, an unspoken recognition of human decency and resilience, the invisible threads that connect acts of courage to the hearts they touch. He knew that the impact of a decision could ripple outward, unseen, but felt nonetheless, and the bond formed in these minutes, brief yet intense, would leave a mark far longer than the storm or the highway, a testament to dignity, patience, and the understated power of acting rightly when it mattered most. David glanced at the clock behind the counter, the red digits casting a faint glow over the linoleum floor, reminding him that the night was stretching into the early hours, yet There was no urgency in his movements, only deliberate attention to every detail. Sarah adjusted her scarf and looked around, her breathing slower now, more measured, the initial shock of the highway fading into cautious relief. David observed the small gestures, the way she rubbed her hands together to generate warmth, the subtle tilt of her head as she scanned the station, and he noted them all silently, aware that understanding came as much from observation as from words. He walked over to a wall-mounted map, tracing routes with his finger, imagining the fastest way to get her home safely, calculating distances in miles, anticipating traffic patterns even at this late hour, each consideration a testament to his quiet diligence. He spoke softly, without drawing attention, sharing suggestions for the safest paths and necessary stops, his tone calm, measured, reassuring without commanding, creating an invisible scaffold of security for her to lean upon. Outside, the rain persisted, a constant backdrop, tapping against windows and roof, yet inside, the soft hum of fluorescent lighting, occasional footsteps of the attendant, and the muted conversations of late-night customers formed a cocoon of normalcy, a stark contrast to the tension of moments ago. David thought about the unpredictable nature of life, how fleeting encounters could leave lasting impressions, and how the most significant acts often passed without fanfare, observed by no one but those directly touched by them. He noticed Sarah relax further, shoulders easing, gaze steadying, and he allowed himself a subtle smile, the quiet satisfaction of having facilitated safety and comfort without needing recognition. He retrieved 2 bottles of water from a cooler, offering one to her with a gesture that spoke more than words, the simple act carrying a weight of attentiveness and consideration, a reflection of his belief in dignity through action rather than announcement. As she accepted it, their fingers brushed briefly, an acknowledgement of shared experience, a fleeting bond forged in trust and mutual reliance. David returned to a nearby chair, sitting with a posture of readiness, still alert to the environment yet maintaining an aura of calm, embodying the principle that presence itself could be a shield. Every sound, every flicker of light, every movement in the periphery was registered, analyzed, and responded to with a blend of instinct and conscious care, an intricate dance of vigilance and patience. In those quiet minutes, an unspoken narrative unfolded. One of resilience, empathy, and human connection, where courage was measured not by spectacle but by steadfastness and composure. The storm outside continued its rhythmic percussion, but inside the service station, a different rhythm emerged, softer yet no less powerful, the heartbeat of shared humanity and the subtle, profound impact of a single thoughtful presence. David felt it deeply, the resonance of doing what was right in the moment, the affirmation that integrity and grace required no audience, only awareness and resolve, and that the true measure of courage often lay in quiet action sustained until the immediate need had passed. David watched as Sarah moved toward the counter to ask about directions, her voice steady but soft, a hint of lingering uncertainty beneath the surface that only heightened his awareness. He remained seated for a moment longer, letting her engage with the attendant, observing the careful way she gestured toward a local map and listened intently to the response. Every movement she made, every small adjustment of her posture, told him volumes about her state of mind, and he noted each one silently, aware that understanding someone in these moments required attentiveness more than conversation. He adjusted his own seating, shifting just enough to remain engaged without intruding, a subtle balance of presence and discretion that he had learned to value over years of parenting alone. The quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above filled the pauses between words, blending with the faint scent of coffee and the damp smell of rain seeping in from the outside, creating an environment that was both ordinary and strangely comforting. David reflected on the unpredictability of life, how fleeting moments could demand immediate courage, and how ordinary spaces could become stages for acts of integrity. He watched as Sarah nodded to the attendant, a small smile appearing as understanding dawned, and he allowed himself a brief sense of relief, noting that the tension in her shoulders had eased. The air inside seemed to pulse gently with the rhythm of patience and observation, a contrast to the rapid urgency of the highway just moments earlier. David quietly moved to the side, offering subtle support without needing acknowledgement, a silent framework that allowed Sarah to regain her composure and confidence. The soft clatter of objects behind the counter, the distant sound of vehicles passing outside, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows formed a background symphony, grounding both of them in the present while the world beyond carried on. He considered the significance of human connection, how empathy and attentiveness could bridge the gap between strangers in a matter of moments, and how these small gestures could resonate far beyond their immediate impact. As Sarah finally turned to him, eyes brighter, expression calmer, David gave a nod, a simple affirmation of shared understanding, the kind that required no words to convey depth. Together, they prepared to leave the service station, each step measured, deliberate, and informed by a quiet awareness of the world around them. David scanned the interior one last time, noting exits, lighting, and subtle changes in the environment, maintaining readiness even in calm, a principle that had guided him countless times. In these moments, the ordinary became infused with meaning, the mundane intertwined with significance, and David recognized that courage and integrity were not defined by spectacle but by the attentive, steady presence one brought to each interaction, every decision, every movement. He felt a profound sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that by remaining vigilant, patient, and considerate, he had helped ensure safety and foster trust without expectation, demonstrating that the simplest actions, carried out with thoughtfulness and care, could leave an enduring impression that was as subtle as it was powerful. David stepped outside the service station with Sarah, the night air cool against their damp clothing, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and asphalt. The streets were quiet, illuminated by the scattered glow of streetlights reflecting on puddles, each light casting soft, elongated shadows that danced with every ripple in the water. He walked alongside her, matching her pace, careful to remain unobtrusive while maintaining a protective presence. His mind was alert, scanning the surroundings, noting the quiet details, the flicker of a neon sign in the distance, the muted sounds of distant traffic, the soft whisper of the wind threading through empty streets. Sarah glanced up at him occasionally, the faint tension in her posture easing, and David offered a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of her composure returning. He guided her toward the nearest main road, pointing out safer paths, slower routes, and well-lit areas, his voice calm, deliberate, reassuring without overemphasis, letting her absorb the guidance while preserving her autonomy. The rain had lightened to a mist, the dampness still clinging to coats and hair, yet it carried a freshness, a quiet reminder of the storm just past and the clarity that followed. David considered how ordinary moments, like walking along rain-soaked streets, could be infused with significance, how attentiveness and care in small actions could ripple outward in ways unseen but deeply felt. He noticed Sarah's shoulders relaxing further, the subtle easing of tension signaling trust, a quiet but profound confirmation that the choices made in the previous moments had created a safe space. Their conversation was minimal, punctuated by occasional observations and gentle suggestions, each word measured, weighted, and delivered with intent, creating an atmosphere of calm control amid the lingering traces of urgency. Streetlights reflected on puddles at their feet, flickering like tiny lanterns marking a path forward, and David found himself noting each reflection, each sound, each shifting shadow, a trained awareness blending vigilance with care. They approached a familiar intersection, and he slowed, checking cross-traffic and signaling her to pause, reinforcing a rhythm of patience and awareness that had guided their journey from the highway. Sarah glanced back at him, eyes meeting his with silent gratitude, and he returned the look, conveying reassurance, integrity, and composure without a single word of explanation. The ordinary setting of empty streets, scattered puddles, and distant lights became a stage for quiet courage and mindful action, a space where the significance of human empathy and presence revealed itself in subtle, enduring ways. David understood that his actions, though unseen by most, had shaped a narrative of trust and care, a reflection of dignity and responsibility. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, mindful of the environment, aware of the ripple of impact even the smallest gestures could carry. As they moved together through the night, he felt the subtle satisfaction of having acted rightly, the quiet acknowledgement that courage and decency often manifested in understated, vigilant, and compassionate ways, leaving impressions that lingered far beyond the immediacy of circumstance. David and Sarah arrived at the entrance of the city courthouse, the large stone steps slick with the remnants of rain, reflecting the early morning light that was just beginning to pierce through scattered clouds. The building loomed tall and solemn, each column casting long shadows that shifted slowly as the sun rose higher, giving the scene an almost ceremonial gravity. David paused for a moment, observing the careful way Sarah adjusted her coat and held her bag, noting her posture, the subtle steadiness returning to her steps, a quiet assertion of self-possession after the events of the previous night. He followed her slowly, matching pace without overt intrusion, aware that his presence was meant to reassure without commanding attention. The murmurs of people entering the courthouse, the soft shuffle of feet on marble, and the distant echo of doors closing added a rhythmic backdrop, grounding them in a space where civility and order prevailed. David's mind traced back to the highway, to the split-second decisions, the instinctive reactions, the calm that had guided him, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose in seeing Sarah navigate this new environment with poise. As they approached the interior, the high ceilings and muted tones of the hallways conveyed a sense of permanence, of structure, of the weight of responsibility that the space inherently carried. Sarah glanced at him, eyes steady, and he offered a slight nod, a wordless affirmation that he was there if needed, a reminder of shared trust and silent solidarity. They paused briefly at a directory, noting the courtroom where her presence would soon have consequence, and David felt the gravity of the moment settle around them without urgency, a gentle awareness that every choice in the coming hours would be measured, deliberate, and meaningful. He observed the interplay of light and shadow across the polished floors, the subtle movements of other individuals who passed with purpose, each absorbed in their own business yet contributing to the collective rhythm of the courthouse. David considered how courage, composure, and integrity could manifest not only in action but in observation, in attentiveness, in the quiet acknowledgement of responsibility toward others, and how these qualities set the stage for moments when they would be recognized, if not immediately, then inevitably. Sarah moved toward the courtroom doors, and David stepped slightly aside, allowing her lead while maintaining proximity, his posture relaxed yet alert, the silent equilibrium of protection and respect. The hushed murmurs and careful cadence of footsteps became almost meditative, a backdrop against which the significance of presence, trust, and dignity unfolded in subtle but profound ways. As Sarah approached the threshold, the weight of the previous night's event seemed to converge, a quiet reminder that the acts of courage and attentiveness they had shared were not isolated but part of a continuum of human decency, a prelude to recognition that would emerge in its own time, marked not by spectacle but by quiet acknowledgement, respect, and the enduring resonance of right action. David stood at the courthouse steps, the morning sun casting long golden beams across the stone, illuminating the faint mist that lingered from overnight drizzle. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement and faint whiffs of coffee from a nearby café, a mundane comfort juxtaposed against the intensity of what lay ahead. He adjusted his worn jacket, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders, steady and grounding, and took a moment to observe Sarah as she approached the entrance, the subtle confidence in her gait now fully returned after the trials of the previous day. Her eyes met his briefly, a quiet nod passing between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared resilience and trust forged in moments few could witness. David followed her into the courthouse, the polished marble floors reflecting both the natural light and the quiet determination emanating from those who moved through the halls, each footstep measured and deliberate. The murmurs of early arrivals, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant echo of a gavel being tested in another courtroom, created a rhythm that seemed to slow time, yet heighten every detail, the flutter of her coat as she moved, the way her fingers brushed against the folder in her hand, the subtle shift of light across the walls, emphasizing the gravity and dignity of the space. As they reached the courtroom, David noted the arrangement of benches, the precise alignment of the jury seats, the way light pooled around the judge's bench, and he felt a calm focus settle within him, the same careful attention that had guided him through previous crises now channeling into observation and presence. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, and David remained just behind, a steady anchor of quiet support, his eyes scanning for anything that might need subtle intervention or reassurance. The moment stretched, waited with anticipation, and David reflected on the nature of courage and integrity, the unseen, unspoken acts that shape outcomes, that influence perception, that leave traces in the consciousness of those involved, even if unnoticed by the wider world. The judge's entrance, the subtle adjustment of robes, the quiet clearing of throats, each detail was a note in the orchestration of justice, and David's attention to it all allowed him to support without intrusion, to be ready without dominating. Sarah approached the bench with composure, her steps measured, her hands steady, and David felt the quiet swell of pride not for himself, but for her resilience, for the grace she carried forward, for the dignity maintained despite circumstance. Each breath, each glance, each micro-movement became part of the larger narrative of presence, of attentiveness, of moral and emotional courage intersecting with the ordinary structures of the world. David realized that this was the culmination of countless small, conscientious choices, of patience and foresight, of integrity exercised without audience, that now converged in a space that demanded quiet strength, respect, and poise. And as Sarah took her place, ready to engage with the proceedings, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the hum of anticipation fading into a profound, respectful silence that allowed character, truth, and quiet dignity to take center stage, marking a moment where the unseen heroics of the ordinary became undeniable in their subtle, compelling power.